don't know how to start a live stream in a way that doesn't feel too awkward and professional. I just want to say, hey, thank you for watching. Welcome to our pre-Oscar live stream hosted by Real Experiences. Here at Real, we are huge on the idea that movies can tell us our story, and that can look like a lot of different things, right? It can tell us our personal story, but it can also tell us our cultural story. And that's why for the past 5 years, we have been really huge on the idea that the Oscars are a strong indicator of where culture has been and also where culture is heading. And so we always look at the Oscars as more than just a night of gowns and dresses and who's going to win, but more of what are these collective films collectively saying about the culture, where we've been and where we're going. And so I'm really excited to host another Oscar Salon tonight. We've been calling it a salon for the past few years. And I was like, what does that even mean? Isn't that a hairstyle thing? And then I found out this year, finally, that a salon in like the 16th and 17th centuries was when a rich manor house owner, which is definitely not us, would host a group of people at their house and have a bunch of like intelligent speakers come and talk about big topics like psychology and science and religion and all that kind of stuff. And so that's kind of what we're doing tonight in a big way. We have 5 guests talking about big, insightful things. They're very intelligent and awesome people talking about religion, politics, well-being, justice, and business. And I'm excited to hear from all of them. But so before we get into that, I thought that one of the best ways to explain what we believe at Real about movies and culture and everything would be to debut the concept trailer for a docuseries that I've been working on for the past few months. I'm writing and directing a docuseries. It's called The Movie Whisperer. And it's really about the person that is also part of hosting this thing, which is my dad. My dad is Brian Coley. He's hosted this for the past few years and has a lot of really interesting, and some might say crazy, some might say genius beliefs about movies and culture. And this documentary really seeks to explore that, the relationship between art and prophecy, artists and prophets, faith and art, movies and culture. And I'm excited to show you all that first trailer tonight. So without further ado, I'm going to play this concept trailer. Hopefully it'll give you a sense of what all this stuff is about. And we'll meet you right here, right after that. So here goes. You've heard of the horse whisperer, the guy who has the innate ability to understand and interpret horses. Well, just outside Atlanta, Georgia, there's a guy some people call the movie whisperer. His name is Brian Coley, and he has the innate ability to understand and interpret people through their favorite movies. An NYU film grad and a former editor at Turner Broadcasting, today Coley runs a company called Real, where he movie whispers on a small scale by showing people what their top 10 favorite movies say about their personal story. But his biggest revelation came 8 years ago when he started looking at the yearly slate of Best Picture nominees at the Academy Awards to see whether there were any common themes shared between the films.
And so about 7 years ago, I started diving into the Oscars.
Because I believe that the Oscars are prophetic and that our artists are our prophets to our generation.
The Oscar nominees give us a picture of where our narrative is headed.
How the Oscars have been kind of foreshadowing our story as a country.
So if you look at what we do at Real Experiences, where we take a person's top 10 movies, and it forms this palette that we can look at certain threads and themes, and ultimately it brings out insights for a person's story. Well, I thought, why not try that with the Oscar films, like the nominees? They form a palette of films. And what I found is as soon as I started looking for threads and themes and insights, it was just like they were pouring out. And then what was crazy is that those insights and themes actually played out in culture over the course of the next year.
In other words, Brian Coley believes that the annual Oscar nominees actually foreshadow major cultural events in America before they happen. Since 2014, Coley has been revealing Oscar themes that have foreshadowed our story as a nation. But it was this most recent year's movie whispering that finally got my attention. As the pandemic tested our devotion to one another at every turn in 2020, the call to be our brother's keeper was only amplified through racial justice protests after the death of George Floyd, the debate over mask wearing, misinformation in the election, and the Capitol siege. And as you may have guessed, Coley believes the Oscar nominees foreshadowed it all back when they were announced in January of 2020. This is footage of Brian Coley on Oscar Sunday in February 2020, before the pandemic was a blip on America's radar.
To remain a we, it seems like these movies are telling us that in the midst of escalating war and battles, for the sake of our children, we have to test our devotions to determine if we will be our brothers and sisters' keeper. I don't know. I just feel like there's probably something that might happen this year that tests this idea, you know? I don't know what it could be. I don't know how it could play out even beyond the election.
So if Coley is right, who is the grand mastermind behind these movies coming together to speak into our story? Is it the directors? Is it the studios? Is it the members of the entire Academy? Brian Coley believes it's
God. I think God is a God of motion pictures. It's his language. And I think he loves using artists. I think he loves using Hollywood to tell his story.
So, this raises a question. Actually, lots of questions. Would God actually reach down and play a part in the creative process of these filmmakers? Would God really choose the movie industry to be his voice? Or can this all be explained some other way? Is this just one guy seeing what he wants to see? To explore these questions, I'm reaching out to movie people, God people, culture people, and people who have changed their lives because of Coley's movie whispering. Finding some answers is really important to me because Brian Coley is my dad, and I need some outside perspective to figure out whether I'm just drinking his Kool-Aid or if he actually could be the movie whisperer. And so here we are. I am excited to have finally introduced that trailer to the world. I mean, it's more of a concept trailer rather than showing footage from the whole thing, but
good job, my son. Yeah.
Doing it. Yeah. This is the movie whisperer himself. I'm
not sure I'm ready to take on that moniker, but yeah, it's I love that it's birthed a docuseries that you're working on. So
I would say if anything in that documentary trailer made you skeptical, that I'm hoping you're going to love the documentary. Like I have really wanted it to be something that feels genuine and feels like I'm earnestly exploring these things of like, okay, what does the world look like if this stuff is true? But also, what does it look like if it's not true? And we've talked to a lot of interesting people about all that stuff. So I'm excited about that. But I think one of the things that we wanted to have you do, that we do kind of at the start of every one of these things, is let you talk about what your theories are and what they are not. Right? Because I think there's a perception, even if you've watched that trailer, of like, oh, are you reading tea leaves or tarot cards? Is this like predicting the future versus you see it something a little bit more nuanced than that?
yeah, so it's definitely not. I don't ever want this to be something where we're kind of forecasting the future or fortune telling or something like that. Instead, my primary belief is that I think that these artists who are the best and brightest artists that I want to honor and celebrate are usually upstream of culture. They're asking questions that eventually we end up answering, and we end up asking ourselves a little bit later downstream in different other kinds of institutions and streams of culture. So to honor them and to really realize that the Oscars are a unique thing where, you know, for the most part, you take commerce out of the equation. These movies aren't made to make a whole lot of money. They're made to win an award. And because of that, they tend to be passion projects of these artists. And so you're bringing together people who have something to say. And so we should be listening to that. And so for me, I just really love this time of year because we get to bring together all of these nominated pictures. I look at the whole palette as if it's a top 10 movie list, America's top 10 movie list, and see what it says.
Yeah, I think that's interesting because a lot of people would assume that the box office would be the most relevant thing toward the culture. And most people my age and even older see the Oscars as very irrelevant. And yet for you, it's more of that these films are made for art's sake, at least a little bit more so than the box office films. But yeah, I think another interesting thing to talk about is the fact that it's not about who wins, right? Like it's not about the winner of this stuff. It's about the collective movies and what they're saying, the themes that they're speaking together in unison, you know?
That's right. So, you know, just because a movie wins doesn't mean that theme of that movie might be more pronounced than all of the movies brought together, looking at threads, looking at themes that kind of tie these movies as one, you know, as far as the nominees for Best Picture.
Yeah. Yeah. And another thing I would say is that it's not you know, you're not saying this thing's going to happen, right? It's more of these are the themes that are going to be wrestled with by
That's
the culture,
correct. Yeah,
right?
that's right.
Yeah. So why don't you walk us through the themes that have occurred in the past few years?
Sure. Let me show the Dog and Pony show here. Hold on one second. Let me share my screen, a little PowerPoint here. So yeah, so this is what we have looked like over the last few years. Usually I've done this for 8 years. Been looking at the Oscars and unpacking the Oscars for 8 years. And what you see is 2 dramatic questions that are coming about over the last 8 years. The first is, will we survive? So in 2014, 2015, and 2016, we were asking the question, these movies were asking the question, will we survive? And if you think about going back in a time capsule and being at that time, we just got out of an economic downfall, and we were really asking, can we come back as a country? Can we come back as can we make a rebound onto the global stage? And so that's the questions we were asking then. And then over the last 4 years, what's been really providential has been, we've been asking in this polarized kind of sense of, us versus them. In reality, the Oscars have been asking, will we be a we? Which is very encouraging, that these movies have been asking, can we come together and be a we?
Yeah, I think it's interesting the fact that, the movies pre-election are asking one kind of collective question together that compounds, and then the movies post that are asking a collective question. And for you, it's not like a yes or no, right? Like, it's not like, will we survive? Yes. Will we survive? No. Or will we be a we? Yes. Will we be a we? No. It's more of this notion of every year a solution to that question is put forward.
That's right. So if we look at the answers that we got from 2014, 2015, 2016 of will we survive, we see, can we get back to the life that we know? This is sort of how we will survive, by getting back to the life that we knew, using our special skills to stage a comeback, and then ultimately overturning the establishment as 2016. So these are kind of the answers that built upon each other over those years.
Yeah. And then, of course, post-election, the question changes significantly.
So the green line is the election. And like I said, it's pretty providential that the dramatic question changed. And over the last 4 years, here are some of the answers, or what I would say is like a recipe, almost like Lego blocks on top of each other, building blocks of answers. So the first answer in 2017 was that we needed to revisit the past and get a proper narrative, which you can see how that is so important with the conversation about race, that we're really, as a country, looking at the proper narrative, our collective narrative of what the past looks like, and looking at our sins of our past. And then, just to show you how this plays out in culture, 2017, that was the year of Me Too movement after the Oscars. It was the year of the NFL kneel down and Charlottesville. So all of those cultural events that came after the Oscars in which this theme emerged, we're all looking at revisiting the past and getting that proper narrative. And then we look at 2018, we see women taking agency. So that's the theme that you see there. And we saw the women taking agency and becoming change agents in Congress that year. There was a whole blue wave of women in Congress. And then the power of words. We were in the middle of a presidency in which the president liked to tweet. And we know that the power of words was really huge in trying to figure out how we were accountable for our words. And then 2019, the answer was that we need to have a sense of power distribution, that power needs to be distributed to the other people. So more people being welcomed to the table being bigger, and power being distributed. And then finally, in 2020, which was the big year, it was being our brother's keeper. So we needed to test our devotion to see if we would be our brother and sister's keeper.
Yeah. And, I think the 2020 was definitely the year that I started taking this a little bit more seriously. I think obviously one of the interesting things about this is the fact that, once again, you're not looking back at this stuff after the fact and saying these were the eras and what we were wrestling with and everything. It was more of the question of, or looking at this this happens at the start of every year. The Oscars are, in February, and then seeing those themes play out in a significant way. So yeah, I think that's pretty huge. But so 2020 was definitely the year that I started taking it a little bit more seriously. I was in England studying, and you gave your speech, and I didn't see it. And then it was months later during the pandemic that I finally went back and watched your speech, in which you said we have to, the collective theme of the movies was that we had to test our devotion to determine if we would be our brother and sister's keeper for the sake of the children. And that was when I went back and saw that theme, when I went back and saw what you had said at the start of the year, I was in the middle of seeing it play out in the middle of the year with the pandemic, testing our devotions and everything. And so it was definitely a huge thing for me. So why don't you walk us through a little bit of that, and then this year, of course.
Yeah, I mean, who would have really realized that in 2020, this theme of testing our devotion, we tested our devotion to each other versus our economy. So it was testing our devotion of our money and our people, being our brother and sister's keeper. You saw that with masks and testing our devotion to our rights, to wear a mask or not to wear a mask, and yet being our brother and sister's keeper. And then we saw that with regard to race and being our brother and sister's keeper as far as people of color. And then ultimately we saw it tested in a big way with the election of testing our devotion with each other when it was sounding like we were going to civil war. In fact, what was ironically is the dramatic question changed to, will we remain a we in 2020, which was pretty frightening when I saw that. So that's 2020, but let's go ahead and go into, if you want to, let's take a look at
2021.
2021. So what's this year looking like? So here we go. So these are the Best Picture nominees for 2021. I hope that you've seen them. I'm guessing you probably haven't, because a lot of people have said they haven't seen it, but they're very available. They're on Netflix and Amazon Prime and all the streaming services. And then this is some of the themes that I've been seeing. So the first one is left over from years past. Power to the Other People is in 4 movies this year. The little asterisk, not the parentheses, is the number of movies that I see this in. Going back and looking at the past again is in 3 of the movies. And then words, the importance of words, is in 4 of the movies. So these are all themes that are from prior Oscar years. And then these are the themes that come out of this year. So we're looking at justice, which justice is kind of found in a lot of movies. It's found in 4 of these movies. And then we start seeing more movies also about new normals. So 4 of the movies are about a new normal. So you have a movie like Sound of Metal. You have a guy who loses his hearing and has this new normal of, having his hearing lost.
Or the father with dementia and getting used to forgetting things.
Exactly.
Or Nomadland, living in a van.
Yeah, just choosing that sense of, I'm going to create my own new normal. Yeah. Same thing with Minari, where you saw a new normal being created for this family. So that is a theme. And then we get to more of the bigger themes. So these are the bigger things that are coming out. So 6 of the movies have big and small acts of protest or countercultural fights.
Yeah. That definitely feels like you could use that phrase to describe many things in 2020.
Yeah, you could. I mean, that we really saw a summer of protest, right? And a lot of these movies speak to that countercultural fight. So you see Judas and the Black Messiah or Trial of the Chicago 7, all set in the late 60s, reflecting those times of protest and countercultural fights. But then you see small acts of protest. So you see things like we were talking about with Nomadland, how she decides to do an act of protest of saying, I'm not going to, have a house. I'm going to live in a van, not down by the river, but live in a van and be a nomad, and live a different life where I'm actually, enjoying the open road.
A promising young woman, her protesting her own sexual assault and the death of her friends and everything.
Exactly. So a lot of that, big and small acts, and we'll look at a lot of these things when it comes to talking to our guest. The speakers that we have tonight and what they mean as far as our culture is concerned. The next one is loss,
which, that's 2020.
That is 2020, right? A lot of loss. And so the idea that these movies are so timely in looking at loss is very important. And part of it is loss of faculties. So again, you have a loss of hearing, loss of mental faculties. But then you have loss of loved ones. So a lot of these films have loss of loved ones in them. I wanted to play a short clip of kind of what loss looks like as a montage in these films. So here's a little bit of what loss looks like in the Oscar nominees.
Everything all right?
Who are you?
Anthony, it's me, Paul.
Who?
I live here.
What is this nonsense?
Your Honor, since this trial began, 4,752 U.S. troops have been killed in Vietnam.
And you can murder a freedom fighter, but you can't murder freedom!
Is that there's no final goodbye. I've met hundreds of people out here, and I don't ever say a final goodbye. Let's just say I'll see you down the road.
There we go. Sorry.
Man, seeing that clip makes me remember why I want Nomadland to win tonight. But I remember being in the theater and seeing that title card at the end where it says, for those who have departed, we'll see you down the road. And it felt wildly well timed for.
Yeah, I mean, we were looking at a title card that was speaking to the nation right there as far as all the people we've lost.
Yeah.
And that they didn't intend to do that, right? Quickly going through some of the other themes, just so you can see some of the bigger themes, is interdependence versus independence. And I'm really excited to talk to some of our speakers tonight about this concept. So I'll save that for then. And then another theme is ownership.
Yeah.
So ownership is like of place. So you've got a lot of people in these movies who are like owning
a van,
living in
her body,
owning
exactly. Your hearing,
exactly,
farm,
exactly.
Yeah.
So a lot of ownership of words. And Mank, he's a screenwriter, and he puts his name on Citizen Kane as a sense of ownership. And then finally, the biggest one is dignity and self-respect. So this is the one that shows up in all of the films, and I feel like is the most important for us to figure out. Not sure how this is going to play out in the future.
It's interesting that, usually the movies don't have all these themes that are reflecting on the year previously. Usually they're all looking forward. And with this, like dignity and ownership seem to be less related, more looking forward. But many of the themes also are reflecting back on our experiences in the pandemic. But even with that, you could say like, oh, these films are reacting to the pandemic. But no, like they were made, conceived years prior, and here are releasing in 2020.
Exactly. Time. The timing is transcendent, right? That's why I believe God's behind it all. So, all right. So I'm going to quickly go through this. This is just my process of how I look at the films and map the themes to the different movies, so you can see all my color. And if you look at my board, it's a conspiracy map. Yeah, there you go. And then here we go. So here's the dramatic question for this year. Not will we be a we? I looked for it, but I couldn't find it. Instead, it is, so thinking about America, putting America as the main character, which is what I do in all these movies. I say, can we, America, reclaim a sense of dignity after suffering loss? So that is the question I think that we're wrestling with. Maybe I think we're going to be wrestling with over the next year, maybe in the future.
It seems like we already are right now.
That's correct. Yeah.
Which of course, once again, this is not a yes or no answer.
That's
well,
correct.
Yes, we will, or no, we won't. It's that these films provide a solution to that question.
That's right. So here we go with the answer to the question. So there's a 3-part answer to this question. To reclaim dignity, we as America need to stop protesting. And so a lot of these characters you just want to say to the characters, stop protesting. And it's stop protesting against being still, new normals, and most importantly, our interdependence.
Depending on each other.
That's right. So those thoughts seem very applicable to 2020, but I feel like we're going to continue this conversation into 2021.
Yeah.
And then the next one is keep protesting. So keep protesting against and within broken systems to assert our independence and agency. So a lot of these movies are about people who are protesting against broken systems. So that's the second one. And then the third one is to claim thriving ownership. So there's that word ownership again, over our words, our body, and the place we call home.
Yeah. That one seems like the most, I don't know what to make of it right now. But then again, it almost gives me a sense of conviction in that this past year, with all the craziness that's happened in America and even in the church, I can be tempted to say I don't own that. That's not me. And yet you have to own something to be able to change it, and to be able to redeem it.
That's right.
Yeah.
Even if it's broken, right? So that's part of it. All right. So Thank you, my son. First of all, oh, by the way, here is some Kool-Aid for you to drink of right there.
I will be, not doing that today.
All right. So we're going to move on, and I want to show you guys who's speaking tonight. So we're going to look at all streams of culture tonight. And so here is our speakers. Let's see if it's coming up here. There it is. So there's our speakers for tonight. We have Evan, who's going to be talking about business in just a second. Nero, who's going to be talking about well-being. Renee talking about justice. Greg talking about politics. And Minho talking about religion. So I guess we should introduce our first speaker for the night. Our first speaker is Evan McLaughlin. So here is Evan. Evan is, whoops, sorry about that. Let me bring him back. There he is. He's the vice president of Inspire CIO, and that is a nationwide peer leadership network of CIOs. So Evan has a really good viewpoint of really interacting with CIOs all across the country and within the network that he is a part of. So he's hearing conversations that a lot of us don't get privy to. So I'm excited for him to kind of tell us how he sees these themes playing out in the business world. So Evan, excited for you to join me.
Great to be here, Brian. It's good to see you.
Good to see you too, man. So obviously you saw some of these themes: ownership, loss. I feel like when we look at this year, one of the things that, besides people, as far as loss is concerned, probably the biggest thing that we were looking at is just the loss of our economy, the loss of opportunities, the loss of a lot of small businesses. So there was a lot of this word loss in what we've dealt with this year. So I wonder if you could just speak to this kind of new normal that we're looking at from a business perspective. Are we looking at a new normal? A lot of us want to kind of get back to normal. And yet I feel like a lot of the Oscar themes this year are saying, don't try to resist this new normal. So tell us what this looks like from a business perspective.
Gosh, great question. Lots of different roads to run down. Let me start with the loss. We can certainly calculate some of the economic loss, right? We see the numbers, we see the downturn and all those pieces. But in our country, the uncalculated loss is, clearly small business has been devastated, in particular in the service industry. And these losses, while financial, in many cases also represent the loss of an idea or a dream or a lifetime pursuit. And the consequence is that many find that this loss comes with this loss of dignity, which is another one of the themes. The dignity that stems from success in provision. So we definitely see this link between consumer confidence and dignity and success and being able to provide, and how do we essentially recapture this dignity? You asked the question of, are we the new normal, or will we return to normal? And there really is no going back. This acceleration in the use of technology and digitization and new forms of working, it's going to sustain. I mean, the rate of digital transformation was significantly accelerated due to the pandemic. Companies are now 3 times more likely to conduct at least 80% of their customer interactions digitally. But I want to get back to this idea of dignity. And as I looked in some of these films, and admittedly I didn't watch them all, but I did watch a couple of them. But where's the good news, and how do we answer that question of getting this dignity back in this year? And here's the great news. While small businesses have been devastated, we're seeing, particularly in our country, the rise of the entrepreneur. Well, Plato said it best, that necessity is the mother of invention. Unlike the economic crises of 2008, 2009, where small business formation really declined, that's not the case. We're currently seeing a flood of new businesses. In fact, in the third quarter of 2020 alone, there were more than 1.5 million new business applications. It's almost double the amount from the previous year. So when we talk about new normal, I really think that much like the 20th century, where we viewed the centuries pre-war and post-war, I think future generations are going to be, looking at this from a pre-COVID and post-COVID way that we really won't be returning to a new normal, to a normal.
That's so good. When we look at the idea of protest, small and big acts of protest, and what those mean in the business world, it's hard not to think about what happened this past, I guess it was fall maybe, where we watched some people who formed kind of this interdependence with each other and decided to, take down the financial elites and what they saw probably as a broken system with the GameStop and Reddit, phenomenon that happens. Like, tell me how you view this moment, because I feel like we're maybe moving to more of this kind of populist idea of us all being able to have a sense of agency and sense of ownership. I felt like that was a big way in which those people were like, we want to own this system, or we want a piece of this system, right? And yet, so my question is, do you think we're moving more towards this kind of populist or post-institutional world when it comes to the business world?
Wow, great question. Let's look at GameStop is a really interesting. I think will become a very interesting case study, and I think at first glance, it definitely looks like a populist uprising, right? You've got the was it the Reddit thread, Wall Street Bets? I can't remember exactly, but a whole group of people come together to put their money into what really is a failing business. It's the Blockbuster of its day. It's the brick and mortar GameStops, and they haven't made profit in years, and all of a sudden their stock is hitting unbelievable levels, and it's directly in opposition to the hedge fund managers who have basically shorted the stock, and they're betting that it's going to go down, and all of a sudden it goes up. So you've got Wall Street just in turmoil because of the stock rising. They're losing lots of money, and then you've got apps like Robinhood, for instance, which what a great populist sounding app that is, right? Rob for the rich, give to the poor. And ironically, they're the ones that shut the trading down on it. But you really do have this moment where a collection of individuals rallied around an idea, and I think intentionally around an organization that caters to the gaming community, right? GameStop. And all of a sudden, they have taken on this gang has taken on the utilize the institution. So it's really an interesting question, Brian. I don't know if this is a foreshadowing of a populist movement, or if this is is going to be the thing that catalyzes the next wave of regulation. But I do think it says a lot about the market and the market forces. But I don't know if this is a populist wave or a sea change.
That's good. And I know you work a lot with CIOs, and you work in the tech world primarily with that context. I really wanted to explore the word ownership, because I don't know if I represent a lot of people in the world, but I feel like that there's this whole dependency, interdependent, and wanting to be independent of our technology is something that we fight with so strongly. Like, we're all so dependent on our devices, and yet at the same time, we want to be so more interdependent. So that drives us to a lot of our devices. So there's just this wrestling match that I see going on. And the thing that I was wondering from the standpoint of ownership, there's a movie Mank, and I felt like when I looked at his words and like him wanting to own his words, all of a sudden it hit me, the concept of, I know there's a conversation about owning our data. And I know that a lot of times we feel like that these institutions with Facebook or Google, I hope Facebook doesn't take us off right now, but that these big tech worlds seem to have us as their kind of puppets out there getting money for them. And it's our data is what I hear a lot of people say. Do you think that this is the conversation that we're getting ready to have, is maybe switching that ownership? And maybe when we look at this concept of ownership, that it's really about us being able to own our data?
Well, I sure hope so. I think that, we've always kind of had an uneasy piece about the ownership of our data. I mean, if you consider the early days of Montgomery Ward and Sears Roebuck, the catalogs that were being mailed directly to our homes, I mean, they had data on us and they could mine it to target what they wanted us to see. Obviously big tech has definitely accelerated this, but we have been willing participants. If you consider when was the last time that you, or probably more advisedly, had an attorney read a terms of service agreement when you downloaded an app? We're so quick to say, yeah, we agree, because we're very trusting that what we're going to get in return is worth whatever we're putting on the line. Now, this has kind of been the strategy of big tech, right? Big tech has provided free access to some amazing services, but you and I both know it's not free if you're ceding ownership of your personal data. So I do think that this is going to be a part of the conversation as we all look at our patterns of behavior that drive this, and potentially, talking about the interdependence, independence. This is going to have to be a bit of a blend of both. That there is going to have to be some independent thinking as it relates to what I actually am going to hand over as it relates to my data. There was a concept, or there was an idea that big tech would at some level pay for your personal data, and that would be a way that we'd go. I don't see that happening. I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon either. But I do think relooking at our patterns of behavior that drive this. I'm always hesitant to suggest governmental oversight or more regulation. But if you view your personal data as an extension of your constitutional, civil, and human rights, perhaps we're going to spend some time debating government's role in this.
That's great, man. Thank you so much for providing this kind of perspective on business. The business lens of these themes. Sorry. So it's just so good to have another lens to look through as we're navigating these themes moving forward. So thank you, Evan, very much for joining us tonight. I really appreciate you bringing that perspective, and thanks for your time tonight.
My pleasure, Brian. It's always good to see you. Good
to see you too, man. Yeah. So next up, we have Nero Feliciano. Nero is a new friend of mine, and I was excited to meet her through a mutual friend. And she is a cognitive psychotherapist, the host of podcast All Things with Nero Feliciano, and the author of an upcoming book. This book won't make you happy, which I love this title. This book won't make you happy. 8 Keys to Finding True Contentment. Man, that's a great book title. All right. And welcome, Nero.
Thank you, Brian. Nice to see you. Nice to be here.
It's good to have you. I'm so excited about getting your perspective on these themes, especially as a person who has probably been thinking a lot about the concept of what we've lost and the concept of grief. And I know with our mental health, I feel like this is a conversation we probably could have for another 2 hours in how are we going to deal with what 2020 was to us over the next, years. And I feel like this idea of loss and dignity and all these themes seem to probably be playing into this mental health world. So my question is, if you were to put America on your couch, what would you say to America right now as far as, our loss, the concept of loss?
Yeah, we have gone through a lot of loss, and therapists have been talking about grief over the past, now it's over a year, and different people are grieving different things, different experiences in different ways. I mean, grief ranges from a lost year in high school to a very dear loved one, but there's no hierarchy of grief. Everyone's grief is very real. They experience it in very similar ways. And that is why we have these stages of grief that we talk about. And I think with loss, one thing that I always tell my clients and say, America was on my couch, as you said, I love that analogy, is that you have to allow yourself to feel what you're feeling. In order for us to move through grief, we can't judge the feelings. We can't talk about a timeline for the feelings, what we should or shouldn't be feeling. feelings are just feelings. It is what it is. And everyone is going to move through loss and grief in their own way and in their own pace. And we need to allow room for our own process to do so. And I think one thing that I've heard and I've said many times as therapists, we know this, that you really have to hear hurt to heal hurt. So it's important that we don't do that alone in isolation. I mean, of course, there's going to be times where we need to be alone, but that we talk about it. We express how we're feeling. We connect with supports and people who can help us so we can move through that process. But certainly this year has been marked by a lot of grief in many different ways.
Yeah, I want to come back to that grief idea in just a second. But one of the things you told me when we first talked that I thought was brilliant was you said that the loss that we think we may be, like this word loss may not be necessarily like all the things we lost in 2020, but it may be towards what we lost in 2020. So in other words, we may be grieving the fact that we got more time with our family, that kind of thing. So could you break that down? Because I thought that was genius of just the idea of how we could view loss as what we've lost from this period of time.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm already hearing that from busy moms running their kids to activities. Before that 2020 pandemic, before everything got shut down, most of us didn't have much time to breathe. We didn't have time to think. We're overscheduled. We're over obligated. We go from one thing to another, and we're motivated by different reasons why we even do that in the first place. I actually talk about that in my upcoming book. But what everybody had talked about was, I'm enjoying the quietness. I'm enjoying time with my family. This is the first time I've had dinner together. I actually now can see what's going on in my life. We saw a lot of issues in relationships because the things that our busyness had covered up prior to 2020, now we're all coming to the surface. So in some ways, 2020 was a time for healing because we could actually see what was going on underneath, because now everything was kind of brought up into the light. So what I'm hearing now from people is that I miss that. I miss that time to be still. I miss that time to connect with the people who I really care about, the people closest to me in my home. We don't have that anymore. We're somewhat back to the busyness of the schedule. And I think when we look back on 2020, there are many of us who are going to look back on those times and really grieve that, because I think people are seeing that in order to keep up with the life that we have and the expectations that are put on all of us, it's really hard to kind of construct that again, to get that back.
Totally. I'm an introvert, just to confess, and I've loved this time. And so for me, I am going to miss and grieve and have a sense of loss of what I've been able to just kind of have as this filling my tank. I feel like I've been able to fill my tank a little bit during this time. The concept of grief, I know that there's different stages of grief, and, from anger to, resistance, all that kind of thing. Do you feel like we are at a certain stage in grief as America right now? Do you kind of look at us and go, we're at this stage of grief? Or how would you view the stages of grief?
So with the stages of grief, they're not linear. You can actually go in and out of different ones at different times, come back to a stage, go back to another one. And it's interesting because in the last couple years, they added a stage of grief. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who did the stages of grief, had someone work with her through that process, and he actually added one called Finding Meaning. And that is kind of at the end where you've passed kind of the acceptance and you're ready to move on and find meaning. And I've seen a lot of people there. I've seen a lot of people still in the anger stage, thinking about what they've lost and how they cannot get that back, especially if you've lost a loved one during this past year. But I wouldn't say we're at one stage of grief. I think just like any sort of grieving process, we fluctuate between all of them, between the sadness, between the disbelief. Is this what our life is like now? Is our world still like this? Do we still have these limitations on us? When is it going to end? The frustration and the anger. And then some people who really have accepted it. It is what it is. And I think those are the people who practice meditation and mindfulness, and they've gotten good at acceptance. But they're also the people that are able to move on in a very healthy way. and accept kind of whatever comes next.
Yeah, I guess that plays right into one of my answers to the question of how do we reclaim dignity is a lot of these characters, I want to say, stop resisting or stop fighting stillness, stop fighting this new normal of your life, and stop fighting our interdependence. Like when you hear those words, you know, that idea, I feel like we're protesting that. How do we make sure that we're not protesting that as we move forward? I guess is the question of, you know, not feeling like, you know, that we had that, but that we can't continue to have that, or that we won't, you know, protest against a new normal. I think that's the biggest question I have is I feel like everyone's going to say, well, we're back to normal. And I don't know if that's the proper mental health way to deal with this.
Right. And part of what I had written about as well was, especially as therapists, our normal prior to pandemic, we were looking at record highs of anxiety and depression, you know, record highs of discontent. And then as we moved into the pandemic, we're saying, okay, we want normal back. But now I think as we get back to it, and now dealing with some of the issues that have come out of the pandemic, including loneliness and isolation and the impact that's had on people's mental health, I don't know if we want normal back. And we might want some facets of normal, but can we forge a new, healthier normal than we even had prior to pandemic? And I think that requires agency. I think that requires rethinking our identity and how we want to go about life, and perhaps making different choices that are very difficult. They're actually very countercultural choices that we have to make. But we can go back to the word dignity, because I know that was a word that was really significant to you. And when we first had this conversation, you kind of left me a little puzzled just thinking about dignity and reclaiming dignity. But as a therapist, you know, we ask a lot of questions. We don't like to give a lot of answers. The question that sat with me thinking about dignity was, what would have caused us to lose our dignity in the first place? You know, why were we going through loss and coming out of it without dignity? So that was the question I was thinking about. And I think dignity and identity are very closely related. And I think that when we think about dignity, it often is interchangeable with identity. When we lose a sense of identity, which is often related to people, experiences, things that we knew as normal, is when we can feel like we lose dignity, because we lose a sense of ourself and our purpose. So that was the way that I saw, you know, coming out of this time. If we are losing dignity, it probably is connected to identity and purpose.
Yeah, that's so great, because, you know, when we do real experiences, it's the idea of looking at people's top 10 movies and helping them find their story in their movies that's connected inside their movies. And I can't tell you, during this time, I've just really seen people just thirsting to reconnect to their story. So what you're saying as far as the ability to kind of find that, like maybe what I'm seeing in their eyes is that dignity kind of coming back from the standpoint of being reconnected to their who they are, what they want, what's coming against them, that kind of thing. So you've written this book. I would love to make sure we plug your book for sure. Is there any kind of things that intersect your book? And I think you were telling me about this idea of happiness. And I want you to explain sort of what's happened during the pandemic as far as happiness is concerned.
Sure. Well, let's connect it to what you're talking about, because we're talking about coming through this time, reclaiming dignity, reclaiming identity, and essentially trying to figure out how to do life and who we are. And the book is all about the practices that help us find contentment, which is more profound and more sustainable than happiness, which is fleeting. It comes and goes. So what I will say is that we don't necessarily need to know our purpose. We don't necessarily need to be completely sure of who we are, because many of us are in transitions. We may not even have found that dignity yet, because that is a process, but we certainly can have contentment in the midst of all of that. And the book is about the practices that help us get there, such as self-compassion, acceptance, gratitude, those types of things that neurobiologically wire us for happiness, but also give us a sense of peace, even in the midst of transition and struggle. So I would say that is one way it is connected to some of the things you're talking about right now.
I love trying to unmute myself. I love it. I want to show you a clip, and I didn't tell you I was going to do this beforehand. So I'm going to surprise you with a clip. This is a clip from Sound of Metal. It is a clip of the main kind of guy who's trying to speak truth into him. And this is the truth that he has for the main character. I want your reaction afterwards. So here it comes.
Sure.
Because you're right, Ruben. The world does keep moving. It can be a damn cruel place. But for me, those moments of stillness, that place, that's the kingdom of God.
So that's it. What do you think? Does that ring true to you?
1000%. I'm a big be still and know kind of person. And I think we learn a lot in the stillness. We can hear our thoughts, we can connect to our creator, and we can connect to our own sense of self, who we are, that oftentimes we forget in these times. And there's a lot of strength in stillness. And we know neurobiologically, it does really beautiful things in terms of peace and calm for ourselves. So yes, I agree 1000%.
Yeah. And to finish things up, I think most people would probably hear that and go, I was stinking still for, like a year now. I'm ready to get out in the world. But stillness is different from isolation, sitting, being alone in our houses, correct?
Oh, absolutely. Stillness is an intentional sitting with yourself and whatever is happening in your thoughts, in your soul, in your spirit, and really becoming one with all that, becoming aware of it. And when we can increase our awareness there, we increase our awareness no matter what we do out in the world, and really experience and take in life the way we were meant to, without distraction, very mindfully. So certainly a different type of stillness.
Well, good luck with your book. I know you said you had to do this like in that you had to squeeze this in because you have a manuscript due on Monday. So yes. Good luck on the manuscript, and thanks for joining us tonight with this perspective.
Thank you, Brian.
All right, take care. All right, so next up we have Renee Bryan, and Renee is the founder of Closer to Eden. She's a licensed professional counselor who specializes in stress management, race relations, life transitions, and grief and loss. So she definitely bleeds over from Nero's world. But I wanted to talk to her specifically because we had a wonderful conversation about justice and sort of where we are within just this moment that we've just had this week with this trial. So Renee, thank you for coming tonight. I appreciate you being here.
Absolutely. Thank you for inviting me. I am so grateful to be here amongst other marketplace leaders, and also just to be able to have these types of conversations. I'm really grateful. So thank you for the invitation.
Whoa. Sorry. All of a sudden something got in my throat. This is what happens on a live stream. So, Renee, one of the things I'm very careful whenever I talk to people of color and allow them to kind of represent is making sure that I'm not tokenizing them or having them speak for all of Black America or people of color. So I just want to disclaim that from the very beginning. But I would like your perspective. I feel like, I watched the trial of the Chicago 7. It was a lot about protest. It happened to come out in September, right after the summer of protest. There was a lot of things about this movie that were so timely from the standpoint of I was even watching the chant the other day. I was watching the movie again. The chant was, the whole world is watching. The whole world is watching this trial, right? And I couldn't help but think of, this trial that we had this past week, and the protest that has led to, I believe, has led to a sense of really accountability or a sense of this trial having the whole world's focus. I really wanted to talk to you about, I know when we talked earlier, I wanted your perspective of this moment, because for me, and maybe this is just a white guy, I felt for a sliver of a moment that we have dealt with so much lack of dignity in our country with regard to race, that there was a sliver of a moment, and I know it was a very one little moment, where I felt, for when that verdict came down, I felt, oh my gosh, we've reclaimed a sense of dignity, at least today, you know? So I wanted to get your perspective on this moment. A lot of people saw it as a moment of justice. And I know when we talked, you used another word, which I thought was very fascinating. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I do feel that first and foremost, yes, the world was watching this case, the Derek Chauvin case against, George Floyd, of the killing of George Floyd. And the world was watching, but this is something that we've seen before play out in other cases. Like if you think of our history and you think of the Rodney King case, right? Everyone saw that case. But for some reason, and I believe that because this happened while we were slowing down, while we were totally stopped in the midst of a pandemic, everyone saw it, right? Everyone saw this case play out in front of you. Everyone saw the knee, Derek Chauvin push his knee in George Floyd's neck. And so this week, what we truly saw was more of accountability, I believe, than anything, more than justice. Yes, I believe that many are happy that the case turned out the way it did, and some maybe not. But at the same time, we do understand that justice, or I want to share that justice is actually a continuum. Justice is not something that is it's not a one-time event. It's really a lifestyle, right? It's a way of life. And so we as a people, as Americans, it would be great to see justice permeated through the streams of culture that we actually are talking about tonight. And that's not something that happens on one occasion. It's done over time. One of the quotes that I think of is actually by Coretta Scott King, and she says that freedom is never really won. You win it and you earn it in every generation. And so this is a moment where I feel that justice is something that is continuing. Yes, we're glad to see the accountability, but how do we continue this, seeing justice play out on a day-to-day basis amongst each other?
That's great. I know that, part of this time has been labeled as a reckoning for America, right? Mm-hmm. And I know your heart is definitely not just the reckoning, but the repair, the idea of how do we repair. And so can you tell me what repair means to you as a person of color? And then also, do you feel like repair has something to do with ownership at all, as far as bringing in one of those Oscar themes of ownership?
Absolutely. Well, first and foremost, when I hear the word repair, I automatically think of something that is broken, right? And so when you think of something that is broken, you understand that it needs mending, right? And so how do we do that? How do we repair? How do we mend something that's broken? Well, I think that we do that through communication and through healthy communication. What does healthy communication look like? Healthy communication looks like us having compassion for one another. It looks like active listening. It looks like having empathy. So those are the things that, these are the ways that you repair. First, through listening to each other, having healthy communication, having compassion for one another. As far as ownership, when I hear that word, I think of, ownership as a means to, as another word to describe it would be management or being a steward. So it's about being a steward over what you have, being a steward over your, your power, being a steward over your influence. And so managing those things in a way, even being a steward over or a manager over your relationships. So managing, that's what ownership to me looks like. And if we are to repair and we are to rebuild, we have to look at it those ways and reframe the way we think of those words.
Yeah, I know the word. I'm probably going to trigger a lot of people right now. The word reparations is a word that is a little tricky, right? But it has the word repair in it. And a lot of people think of it very financially driven, right? The concept of, well, I want more ownership over what I've lost. Like when we think of what people have lost over several, decades and centuries as far as people of color. So I know most people are ready to run out the door when it comes to the financial aspect of this, which I do believe is also a part of a reckoning and a repair. What is that? And maybe it's what you just described, but is reparations just another word for these all forms of repair that you're talking about?
Well, reparations would be a piece of it. And when we think about, you mentioned financial. So when you repair someone or you repair something, the word restore also comes to mind. So when you're thinking about that, you want to restore a person or a thing to its original intent, its original purpose. And so in order to do that, that may require financial means, that may require, again, communication, having a conversation, having multiple people at the table to help to make the decisions. So it's multi-layered, it's multifaceted. It's not just, okay, here's the financial, that's a piece of it, but we also want to, it's also mental, emotional, restoring, helping people giving resources to help to restore people emotionally. So there's layers when you're talking about repair. It's not just a one-time thing or just finances. It's the whole act of restoration.
I love that. I love that picture of restoring something back into the place where it should be. That's so beautiful. And yeah, I just love that image. As far as there is one movie I would love for you to talk about, because I feel like it has something to do with the idea of protesting and yet at the same time, to stop protesting in a way. And it's the wrestling match I see in the movie Promising Young Woman. You have a woman who is kind of stuck in the past. She has lost a friend. I'm going to kind of give away the movie a little bit. She's lost a friend who committed suicide because she was sexually abused. And so she's lived in the past of this loss of her friend. And she goes out and pretends like she's drunk every night to have these guys bring them back to their place. And she kind of, does a little, a thing on them where they have to wake up and realize they're taking advantage of her, where she all of a sudden comes out of her drunken stupor and just is like, no, I'm not drunk and you're taking advantage of me. And she just is stuck in the cycle of doing this. So part of me as an audience member is like, I want her to move on. In fact, one of the change agents in the movie are the truth tellers, just telling her, you've got to move on from this past. And yet at the same time, she goes, and the rest of the movie, she seeks vengeance. And so she seeks vengeance on the original perpetrators of this sin of her best friend being lost. So she goes and tries to find this kind of brat pack of guys and bring them down with vengeance. And part of you as a movie watcher is going yes to that too. And so I wanted you to speak to that idea of, what would you say to that woman as far as the idea of accountability, justice, vengeance, dealing with the past, sins of the past, which has been a theme, of us having to look at the sins of our past? How do we deal with this idea of, it's so easy for, I think, a non-person of color to go, well, that is the past. Like, let's move on from the past. So part of it is that message of how we move on healthily in a healthy way. And then what is that vengeance kind of aspect of things look like too? So.
Yeah, absolutely. First, I think it's about understanding and acknowledging. There's a lot people, and we're talking about this woman here in this movie. There's a lot of dignity that comes in just naming things and acknowledging people's hurt or acknowledging something that has occurred in their life. So actually naming it, acknowledging it, giving the person the space to process through it. And then the second part of it, I would ask the woman, who do you want to be? You know, you're here now, but who do you want to be? Where do you want to go from here? I think that is a key question to ask because it gives her ownership of how to move forward versus us telling her or someone telling her this is what you need to do or this is what you need to, where you need to be. It allows her ownership. And then when we think about, you know, you mentioned women, and when we think about how you know, the history of women and just how women are played, are perceived in culture, women are often objectified and those types of things. So there's a wrestling with that, and sometimes there's such a ploy to say like, I have to voice my opinion, I have to be this or I have to be that. So it's helping the woman to identify who she wants to be and where she wants to go at this point and moving forward, given all of the loss, all of the hurt, all of the pain that she has faced, if that makes sense.
Totally. Well, thank you so much for giving us this perspective. And I've enjoyed getting to know you. And thanks again for just being on the live stream tonight.
No problem. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Sure. Thanks, Renee. We'll talk to you soon.
Okay. All right.
All right. So next up is a high school friend of mine, I'm proud to say, Greg Kennard. Greg actually graduated from Parkview High School with me, go Panthers. And now he is Representative Greg Kennard, who represents the 102nd District of Georgia in the Georgia House of Representatives. He's also founder of Inspire, an outreach program to Atlanta. And so welcome, Greg Kennard. Greg, how are you, my friend?
Hey, Brian, how are you?
Good. It's so good to see you.
Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you great, man, and I love the background.
It's such a nice evening in Georgia here. I couldn't pass up the opportunity to be outside.
To rub it into everyone else who might be cold out there or something like that. Yeah, nicely done. Well, I kind of want to jump right in with you because we're going to be talking about politics, which is a really hard subject to talk about. And yet I feel like this is a really important subject to talk about. I know that your heart, after looking at your Facebook posts for years, I know your heart for politics comes from a certain place. And so can you kind of explain how you got into politics in the first place and why you did and how that came about?
Of course. First of all, I'm a pastor. First of all, I'm a husband and a dad. But occupationally, I've been a pastor for over 30 years, and I founded Inspire Outreach, a church here in Gwinnett County 22 years ago now. And our church was founded with the premise of just doing the organic pathology of the Jesus stuff, giving clothes to the naked, feeding the hungry, giving drink to the thirsty, taking in strangers, visiting those in prison. And so we've been very community-based and very outreach-minded. So we have transitional programs to end homelessness and domestic violence. We have 70 people in our program at a time, coming from very different places, from incarceration, from drug treatment, from mental health facilities, from the bridge, from abusive situations. And they come to Inspire to find wholeness. So we've been doing these programs now for 14 years and have served thousands of people. So after doing this for this long and seeing these kinds of people in this kind of quantity and numbers, you start picking up on patterns and trends that you just can't really ignore. And when you start looking under the hood, taking a deep dive into why things are this way, where you see particular communities affected more than others, I began to just look at what is the root cause? And I've come up with the idea that poverty is at once behavioral and structural. So in our program, we work with the individuals on their personal responsibility of behaviors, habits, decision-making, belief systems. But you can't deny that there is a system in place and a structure in place that's affecting these outcomes. And the more I began to look at it, I began to realize that actually politics, political power, policy, legislation determine a lot of these results when you're talking about the poor. So in 2018, I threw my hat in the ring to run for a state representative office here in Gwinnett County. I was fortunate enough to win. I won back in 2020 for my second term. So at Inspire, as a pastor, I work with on the behavioral side, but in the state government, I work on the structural side, where I'm trying to massage legislation, create legislation that will give us better outcomes in terms of these poverty statistics.
That's great, Greg. I feel like you're representative of this concept of small acts of protest that are, basically dealing with broken systems. And it sounds like you saw the system as broken and wanted to engage it. I feel like there's in Judas and the Black Messiah, which is a part of this year's nominees, there's definitely that power to the people, that kind of idea of a very much more populist sentiment. And a lot of times, whenever I would do the Oscar breakdowns and I would talk about, will we be a we? There was a lot of people who would push back on me and go, and you're talking about socialism or communism or something like that. So the idea of unity and the idea of, how we become more of a we in our society without all this fear of these isms. Can you speak to that, especially in light of the fact that we come from a tradition in America of being very individualistic, like we have that American individualism. Like, where do you see where we are right now and that interdependency versus independency, of broken systems, but interdependency? Do you feel like this we is so important to the work that you're doing?
Yeah, first of all, I don't see the system as broken. I think the system is working perfectly as it was designed to work. Okay,
good.
So this system was set up intentionally by the dominant group, and it is working as it's supposed to work. It's not broken. It's perfect. It's working perfectly. And so what has to happen is we have to deconstruct and dismantle the current system to rebuild a better system that's equitable and offers access to opportunity for everybody. But right now, we have inequities, and that's not by accident, that's by design. So that I wanted to make that clear from my view. Also, when we're talking about finding peace and unity, a lot of the protests that I'm a part of, there's a chant that says no justice, no peace. So the idea is before we can have peace and unity, we've got to have equity and a more just and fair society. I often think about the scripture from Isaiah 40, which says every mountain shall be, or every valley shall be exalted, every mountain and hill shall be made low, the crooked place is straight, and the rough place is plain, and the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and we shall all see it together. Before we see the glory of the Lord together, there has to be crooked places made straight, rough places plain. The high places have to be brought down, the low places have to be brought up, so there's equality and equity. Once we get there, then we can have peace and unity. But it's hypocritical for the dominant group to say we need peace when we're not dealing with apples for apples and there's inequities in our society.
Yeah, that's so much plays into that theme that I saw in 2019 of power to the other people, right? That the table needed to be widened. And so I wonder, as we look at, politics in general, I think a lot of people after this election, when we talk about dignity, I felt like dignity somehow went out the door with the election, with the insurrection. Like, it's just felt like, for me, I don't know if this is the way you feel like it, but I just feel almost embarrassed as American by virtue of some of the blemishes that's happened, especially at the end of the year or in January. How do you feel like we reclaim a sense of dignity as America from a political standpoint when everybody is pretty much disillusioned with politics these days?
Okay. Well, from my view, and I go down to the Georgia House 40 days a year as a part-time legislator, and we pass hundreds and hundreds of bills that ultimately get signed into law. And I've got to tell you that between 90 and 95% of the bills that are passed into law, they're bipartisan. Both sides agree. When I'm faced with a bill and a vote, I'm looking at the green, I support the bill, or the red, I oppose the bill. And most of the time, I'm pushing greens. And that gets lost in today's narrative, where most of the laws that's being passed in Georgia, it is definitely bipartisan in its support. Most of us, Republicans and Democrats and independents, we're on the same page 90 to 95% of the time. There are a handful of 10, 12 bills that come through that are very controversial, very polarizing, and they end up sucking all the oxygen. And we don't see that most of the time we're on the same page, that we really do have more in common than we don't. So I think that's something that needs to be said a lot. And I'm committed to saying that. I am a Democrat, but I am a Georgian. I'm a moderate. And I've lived in Georgia my whole life. I've lived in Gwinnett County my whole life. So I've seen a lot. And I would like to say that Georgia is a great place to live. We have our warts, we have our issues. But down at the legislature, down at the Gold Dome, most of us are on the same page passing legislation that is beneficial to all Georgians. And I think that gets lost in today's narrative, and we're focused on stuff. The minority, these are important things and they need to be highlighted and we need to talk about them. But they're taking up too much of the conversation from my view.
That's so good, Greg. It's good to know that. That's such an optimistic view. I think we do. And that's pretty much, one of the questions I had for you is a lot of in the same way that as I was talking to Evan about business, how I feel like I'm almost, I don't have any ownership or any agency when it comes to, my data or my, like how Facebook and Google and all my dependency, even though I do, it just doesn't feel that way. In the world of politics, it feels like, God, there's these two monoliths, of these two parties, and there's these two news, stations and all this kind of stuff. And it just feels like we don't have any ownership. What would you say to the word ownership? Like in the world of politics, how do you view the concept of ownership?
Well, in the movie, the Chicago 7, they bring out this idea, and I loved it. He said, well, we have the opportunity to overthrow the government every 4 years. and when you think about it, through the power of the vote, we do have a voice. We do have agency. We do have a means to an end. We can take ownership, and that's through the power of the vote. So, but in reality, that timetable is really every 2 years. I know as all the Georgia Assembly elected officials, we run every 2 years. So there's an opportunity every 2 years to get out and vote. And if you don't like something that the state's doing, change it. And I just wanted to, encourage everyone who's listening. You need to vote every election, every 2 years, midterms, presidential, local, all the way down the ballot, because every one of those positions, those elected positions, have consequence to your everyday life. And if you don't like something that's going on, get out and vote.
That's good, man. I feel like I want to go back to a concept that we were talking about earlier, because I just feel like this is so important to right this moment. Is this idea of kind of this populist feel, where it's like we have, more power to the people versus that individualism. Like, how do you think that's going to land as we move forward? Is there a sense in which there's any sense of, like we're headed more towards this concept of we, but it has these pitfalls and it has these good things. And we have individualism, but it has these pitfalls. It has these good things. I remember when we started discussing, you introduced a word, which I'll let you introduce, about philanthropic. You go ahead and say.
Philanthropy capitalism.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You
so
said that's what you are. You're a philanthrop-capitalist. So tell everybody what that means.
well, it's the idea of doing business and capitalism with a soul, where it's not just about me, but you're thinking about the community and all your decision makings and in the way that you conduct business, because it's not just about me. And yes, I take personal responsibility for my life, but the scripture says that I'm also my brother's keeper. So I also have to not just think about me, but how my actions, my life are impacting the larger community. So forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. Give us this day our daily bread. It's not about me and you, it's about us. So and however I live my life, personally, professionally, politically, I've always got to think about the larger picture and how my actions, my decision making impacts the larger group. So I think all the issues that we're talking about, whether it's poverty, whether it's social justice, racial justice, there's a personal responsibility component, but there's also a community responsibility component.
So good, man. Well, it's good to see your face. It's good to see that you still look exactly young, and I'm an old man in the room. So,
it's been 37 years.
Still rocking that.
1984.
Yeah, it's pretty good. Thanks, Greg, so much, and I hope to catch up with you soon. I appreciate you being here tonight.
It's great to see you.
You too, man. All right. Last up is Minho. Minho is Minho Chung. He's a Reverend Minho. I wanted to look at the concept of church and make sure that we look through the lens of faith as one more lens, as well as I'm going to bring in Minho here. Minho, good to see you, my friend.
Hey, how are you doing?
Good. I wanted you also to talk, and again, it's the same thing I was telling Renee. I don't want you to feel like you're having to represent all of Asian Americans, much less Korean Americans. But the movie Minari is a big Oscar nominee, and this I want it to be a dark horse tonight and win. So first of all, can you tell me? I know we've seen a lot of loss from the standpoint of what's happened here in Atlanta in the Asian America community. We've lived in an environment where it's been a little bit caustic as far as trying to associate race with this virus. Can you give me a perspective of this moment from your worldview as an Asian American, specifically as a Korean American?
Well, Brian, I appreciate you allowing me to be on. It's a privilege. The Asian American experience, I think as we've gone through different things, I've gotten a lot of support. I think there are people who've gotten a lot of support, but then also there have been experiences that I've had where I've gotten pushback, where I even had someone tell me that being hyphenated American is not really American. And I didn't really know how to respond to that, but it just goes back to sometimes, and I come into a unique situation because I'm second generation. My parents immigrated here from Korea. And I was born here, grew up here, and at times when I'm in the Korean community, sometimes I feel like I'm not Korean enough. And then when I'm with my friends and in a different setting, and majority Anglo setting, I'm not white enough, or I don't fit in. And so my Koreanness or my Asianness stands out. And so it almost feels like there are times where it feels like I'm a person with no country or no place to belong. But as a pastor and as a father, as a husband, I have 3 young kids. We have to keep going. There's hope. There's always hope, and that's the great thing about being a pastor and also understanding the gospel, is that there is hope, and there is always redemption in what we do and how we live.
I love it, man. Thank you for sharing that perspective. I feel like that's a perspective that I get with a lot of the people who have the hyphen, is that I feel like I'm, like you said, I don't seem to have, be able to I live in 2 different spaces and not have my own port of call, Yeah. We saw Parasite win last year, which is Korean American. We see Minari being nominated this year. I feel like that there is a voice from the Korean American perspective that's very important for us to listen to. So that's one of the reasons I wanted for you to talk about your experience. But in this movie, there is a father who's kind of
trying to be countercultural, like I said, fighting against the countercultural kind of chicken sex scene, which is the idea of this manual labor and separating chickens from males to females, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so he's decided, I'm going to try to seek dignity by owning this farm, and he wants for his kids to see him and for the first time see his dad, see their dad as a person worthy of dignity. Can you tell me what you think it's like? And a lot of people have said this is a movie about the American dream and kind of owning a piece of dirt like we used to. That's the way we saw our dignity, was kind of owning a piece of dirt. What do you think is the American dream now? And is it still found in some sense of dignity found in ownership? Maybe ownership of a different kind?
Well, watching this movie, there was so many similarities. My parents, they moved to Alabama. And so I was a Korean American that grew up in Montgomery, Alabama. And so,
which is perfect because the family goes to Arkansas, right?
Arkansas,
so
yeah.
Kind of concept, yeah.
And so there were so many similar. I think about my parents. My father opened up his own business. He was a martial arts instructor, and my mom worked for a manufacturing company. And then I think about my wife, her parents. They moved here from Korea, and they started from scratch, the opening up dry cleaners. They own dry cleaners, and so when I think about generations of people of our family coming over to America to leave everything behind, to come to find not only just the American dream, but the dream to find a better life. And they wanted to provide me and my sister and our family, the next generation. They wanted to provide a better life, give us an opportunity to get a good education, and to make something of ourselves. And so they just poured and sacrificed so much for us, so that they could see us have the opportunities and to make a difference and to make an impact in the world that we live in. And so sometimes it can be harsh because we face different things that our families wanted us to make sure that we went into professions that have dignity. And so through us vicariously, there's dignity in seeing that your children became doctors and lawyers and engineers. But I also see that there is dignity in building a business and making it in this world and contributing. Mainly, it's about contributing to your family and providing for your family, and there's a sense of pride in that when we do something and we build something and we get to pass it to our family, and they get to continue to carry that on. There's dignity. So there's a lot of it thinking about the next generation, which I think that's the American dream for not just Asian Americans or Korean Americans, but for all.
Yeah. I want to switch to your role as a pastor. And when you hear these words, I'm just going to kind of throw out these words of protest or ownership and dignity and all of those words that come out of these themes this year. What do you feel like is the word for the church? If this was just for the church, what do you feel like the church needs to hear out of those themes?
I think loss and redemption is something that I think is huge. In the movie Minari, it wasn't until the family experienced great loss where there was almost like a redemption. There was a redemptive factor where they got to they included other people and they relied on community, and they got to step in and do something and build something together. And so there was the grandmother. She plants this Korean it's like Korean parsley, and she plants it by this river stream, and if you don't know much about the actual plant minari, it's a plant. It's like parsley or watercress, and what happens is it dies, but it grows back, and when it grows back, it grows stronger, and it continues to multiply. And I think that's a theme for the church, because we are called to die to ourselves each day. And the good news is that Jesus says, I'm going to come and I'm going to redeem you, and you'll be stronger. You'll be able to face the obstacles that you face in this life. We get the hints of those themes in
I love it, man. I wish we had more time to talk, because I feel like there's so much more. And for people to watch that film specifically, I know specifically the filmmaker has a lot of faith themes in the movie. It definitely feels like a parable that Jesus would tell. So
Yes.
I love that we were able to look at it not only through the eyes of you as a Korean American, but also through the eyes of faith. So encouraging people to see that. But thank you so much for this time to spend with me. I'm going to have to exit now because the Oscars are coming on right now, and people look forward to that first moment of who's hosting and what are they doing. So thank you so much, Minho. I appreciate you being on tonight, and we'll just both wish a good luck for. I always mispronounce it. I'm like a Southerner going Minari, you know.
It's okay.
So anyway, thanks again. I appreciate it. And for all you guys who've been watching this live stream, thank you for watching, and enjoy the Oscars.